There's never a dull moment in the Premier League, and especially not in the transfer window, because continually, just as you think you're on the up, some bad news comes along to bring you crashing back down to earth. We're going to talk about all that and more in today's Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show, joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. Apologies for the slight lateness, again, just sorting out some connection and making it as good as it can be. I'm sure I'm quite blurry on your screen. Apologies if that is indeed the case. There's not much I can do about it this morning. This is the last day, of course, that I'll be doing this from here, and tomorrow morning normal service will be resumed, so you'll see me usually as always back in the studio. So yes, do bear with for today, and tomorrow things will be back to normal. Good morning to those joining us all in the chat box. Appreciate your time as always. Saying good morning to people because I didn't do it yesterday. CAU, good morning to you, to Kenda, to Carlton, Walking Man. We've got Zaku in the chat, Mask Cannon Paul, Z, Gooner 76. We've got Umar in the chat, Jay Collins, Kevin, Timothy. We've got Damien and Ray. We've got Serling and Aidan. Good morning to you all. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Please do drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. But without further ado, let's get into today's stories, shall we? Of course, if you did not catch yesterday's reaction to our win over Aston Villa, I recommend that you go and catch up on that as soon as you possibly can. It is the last live upload on the channel. So we talked all about Trossard, Partey, Saliba, David Raya, of course, as well. And we reacted to some transfer news too, and took your questions as always. But yeah, if you've not yet watched that, please make sure you jump back over and give that a watch. Arsenal lost in their pre-season friendly to Chelsea yesterday. Jonas Ardeval's side in their first real proper test against one of the sides, of course, that will be vying for the WSL Championship next season. Sadly fell to a 1-0. Quite a tight game overall. Did a little bit of watching the highlights and read what some of the writers who were at the game were talking about, but it seems that we didn't take our chances when they fell, and Chelsea just took a scrappy game. But Arsenal, of course, last season fell way behind Chelsea in the WSL, and the hope will be that they close the gap considerably in this forthcoming season. And the result here, of course, aren't going to be indicative of what we see throughout the campaign. Pre-season games, as we saw with the men's side over the summer, are obviously going to be, up for interpretation, if you will. But it still would have been an opportunity to lay down something of a marker, which I suppose has been missed. But more games to come before the WSL kicks off very soon indeed. In terms of the Premier League roundup, of course, as well, for the weekend's fixtures, with them all now being completed. Brighton beating Manchester United 2-1. Crystal Palace losing at home 2-0 to West Ham United. Fulham beating Leicester City 2-1. Manchester City getting poked by Ipswich and then responding with a 4-1 victory. Southampton losing a really important game. I mean, we talk about kind of relegation scraps at the end of the season. Southampton and Forest, two teams, of course, we expect to be very much intertwined with the relegation battle again. Well, Forest coming away with a massive 1-0 victory there. Spurs, big win over a very poor Everton side, who again look like they're in a lot of trouble. That's 2 games, 2 losses, 7 goals conceded, and Spurs winning 4-0 on the day. Arsenal, of course, as we know and spoke about in detail yesterday, beating Aston Villa in a huge, huge result. I know the mood is pretty low around transfers at the moment, but it shouldn't be low in regards to what Arsenal are doing in the league, because what the players we have are delivering. And yeah, it wasn't like a storming performance, but in terms of the result, that's all that matters at the end of it. And Arsenal got the result, and a massive one it was. Bournemouth drawing 1-1 with Newcastle. Yesterday, VAR controversy happening again. 2 incidents of note in this game. The first one, of course, the 93rd minute winner being ruled out for handball. I think this is incredibly harsh, and I don't want to see goals ruled out for these absolutely ridiculous borderline calls that are subjective. I think if the goal's been given in this state, there's just not enough evidence to suggest that this one should be ruled out. I feel really harsh for Bournemouth. And then Joel Linton clotheslining Neto should have seen red as well as the game was being seen out too. It sets a bad precedent for my referees. The referee didn't even go over to check the screen, to my knowledge. It was a really bad call and a really bad decision on both sides that fell in Newcastle's favour. And yeah, it's an interesting one because I know that Newcastle have been the target of rival supporters' kind of scrutiny around VAR decisions and suggestions that Newcastle have been pretty fortunate when it comes to VAR. Of course, from an Arsenal perspective, we know they were last season with the whole, was the ball in or out, and the Guimaraes red card as well. So yeah, again, Newcastle benefiting, it seems, from VAR. Wolves then lost, despite getting the score back to 2-2 against Chelsea, 6-2 on the day. Noni Madueke. It was quite funny because we had a chat about Noni Madueke on the channel only a few days ago, and a lot of people were very, very against the idea of Madueke being a potential option if he's not going to get minutes for Chelsea. But he did start the game and he scored a hat-trick. All 3 goals being assisted by Cole Palmer, who appears again to have kicked off this campaign very much in the sense that he left off the previous campaign. So one maybe for your fantasy teams if you needed any more question marks about that. And then the late kickoff, Liverpool beating Brentford 2-0. Arne Slot talking after the game about how they'd won 2 difficult games. Of the 3 title challengers, Liverpool have by far the easiest start to their season. Of course, they won away at Ipswich in the opening game. They've now won at home to Brentford. Meanwhile, of course, Arsenal beating Wolves and then going to Aston Villa and still getting the same number of points as well, and also on the same goal difference as Liverpool after those 2 games. Man City, of course, leading the way on goal difference after they won their opening 2 games. And it seems to be that this is going to be very much the trend throughout the course of the season. Moving into Arsenal news specifics, though, 2 stories for you this morning, one bigger than the other. This one still quite big, to be fair. Gabriel Jesus' injury. Of course, he was not involved in the game at the weekend because of what was understood to be a minor thigh issue. A minor groin issue. And that has shown early indications of not being too serious, and he shouldn't be out for too long at all, which obviously is a very, very good thing. I don't think this has any necessary kind of impact on transfers or on outgoings either, as we'll talk about shortly. But it's good news that Gabriel Jesus' issue is not anything serious, and hopefully we'll be back very, very soon indeed. But the big story of yesterday and our headline story of the day is, of course, Eddie Nketiah. Arsenal had agreed a £30 million package with Nottingham Forest to sell Eddie Nketiah to the East Midlands club. However, that deal has now collapsed because of a number of interesting threads, it seems. So 3 to 4 days ago, Fabrizio Romano tweeted saying that Eddie Nketiah had agreed personal terms with Nottingham Forest. This has since been followed up by David Ornstein, of course, reporting that a deal between Forest and Arsenal was close. And then yesterday, it was reported that, of course, that deal between the 2 clubs had been agreed. However, suggestions were that the players' side then became an issue. So Arsenal, of course, agreed that 30 million. So on the whole Edu side, he doesn't really come into scrutiny here because despite what some people might try to convince you, there was an agreement between the clubs. Arsenal got that £30 million agreement that they wanted. It seems to be that on the other side of things, there are the issues that have scuppered this deal. It's interesting because obviously there were the reports suggesting that Eddie had indeed agreed personal terms, that the players' side was also agreed. Now, if you've got the players' side in terms of his deal situation being agreed and you've got the club side of things being agreed, it makes you start thinking about what elements of this deal have been a problem or what have scuppered this deal. It's difficult to know for sure, of course, because we are lacking a lot of the details. I've been off this weekend, so I've certainly not been chasing this story. But it does raise a few question marks about what's going on here on the players' side, I think, far more than the club side. The good news for Arsenal fans, of course, is that there is still a strong expectation that Eddie Nketiah will leave the club during this window. We know that Crystal Palace have since, with this deal collapsing, opened contacts with the players' camp, and there is expectations that, of course, the clubs will speak. Dharmesh Sheth of Sky Sports also reporting that a unnamed European side are also interested in a deal for Nketiah as well. Arsenal will hope to get at least £25 million. There's suggestions that Palace's offer of an opening fee could be 25. We know that that will probably be rejected because we know that Nottingham Forest at £25 million offer rejected. However, because the deal is now reaching the closing stages of the window, it could open up Arsenal's, I suppose, openness maybe to do a deal at a lower price just to make sure that they get the deal through the door. You guys know where I've stood on this deal for a long time. £25 million was my threshold. I wanted £25 million. We got £25 million, and then we got more than £25 million. And sadly, this deal has now reached a very murky water, shall we say. But the feeling is that he will still leave and Arsenal will still get that deal for Nketiah. But of course, at this stage, it won't be to Forest, who have now submitted a new bid for Santiago Jimenez of final 35 million euros plus add-ons and a sell-on clause, which seems to me very low for a player that was being very highly rated. I don't really see the idea of him moving to Forest as being a good step in his career. With all the respect, and I have a lot of time for Nottingham Forest. I lived in the city for 3 years. I like Forest. I want them to stay up. I enjoy visiting the city. It's nothing to do with them. It's just, it seems to me a strange deal. And also that no other clubs are really coming in for Jimenez as well, despite these figures being what I talked about. Suggestions are, according to Fabrizio Romano, that no longer is there a unwillingness from Jimenez to move and that actually personal terms would be okay. That said, there were claims, of course, from the same source that Eddie Nketiah had agreed personal terms, which turns out not to have been the case. But we move. Anyway, that, of course, leaves us with the question, are Arsenal going to sign a forward during this window? As we sit here on Monday, with the window closing on Friday, there are no standout names at the moment being talked about as potential players for Arsenal. There are whispers of Nico Williams. There are suggestions of Adingra at Brighton. There has been, mentions of a smattering of other names like Ademola Lookman, for instance, as well. There are names. And what you need to know as fact, because, of course, facts are so thin on the ground at the moment, but what you need to know as fact is that Arsenal want to sign a forward. That is what we know. There is no suggestion that Arsenal don't want to do this or they're unwilling to do a deal. They want to sign a forward. It is just the case of who, as always has been the question throughout the course of this summer. How confident am I regarding Arsenal doing a deal? I'm probably about 30%. I'm probably about 30% confidence right now that Arsenal will bring in a forward. Reece Nelson, I think, will stay, and that has changed over the last week or two because of the situations regarding not just, of course, Arsenal's incomings, but also because I don't really see the suitors emerging for him unless something surprising happens on deadline day. And to be honest, I would keep Reece Nelson at this point. I think it's important that we have that depth in the squad. We know he's a decent player. He's not a world beater, of course, but he's a decent player. I actually thought was our most impressive player on the American tour over the summer. So, yeah, I'd expect Reece Nelson to stay. It was interesting, of course, the fact he came off the bench at the weekend, giving him some minutes. Eddie Nketiah not, of course. There are names, and I'm sure we're going to talk about plenty of those and more in part 2 as well with you guys. So make sure you start getting your questions ready and using that capital Q to help them stand out into the chat box, and I'll be trying to reach and answer as many of them as possible. But yes, there is a lot of unknowns regarding the last 5 days of the transfer window, and we need answers to plenty of questions. Now, if the question that you've got is what is the best VPN service to use, there is, of course, only one answer. And that answer is NordVPN. Because, of course, by going to nordvpn.com/Gooner, you can get yourself a significant discount off a 1 or a 2-year plan. And with that 2-year plan, you can get 4 months extra thrown in free on top of that as well. Go to the link down in the description, or as I say, head over to nordvpn.com/Gooner to get yourself all the details. Gives you the safety and security that you need online. I was speaking to someone in our Discord server the other day. I was talking about the fact that they might actually need a Discord server because of something that happened to them, on the internet. And VPNs are just an absolute necessity in 2024. So make sure you get hold of it because they produce and provide that security that gives you that extra layer of protection that you need. Also, the ability to change your geolocation if you're heading on holiday, going away somewhere, is absolutely invaluable as well. So you won't miss out on the things that you want to watch and keep up with that typically wouldn't be available in the country that you're heading to, as long as, of course, it is supported by Nord. All the information down in the description, of course, as well, as is the information for Football Prizes, continuing to help support the channel. We're very appreciative of Football Prizes supporting us here. Arsenal-related prizes are available on the website. You can win some fantastic Arsenal memorabilia and, of course, some extra fun stuff too that I recommend you go and check out by the link in the description, or just type in Football Prizes on Google. It will take you there. You won't have any troubles finding it whatsoever. We've had plenty of winners here at TGT that have won some fantastic signed shirts and other fantastic kind of ornaments and things they can show up on their wall and really show off to their friends. So I recommend you head over there as well. Check out all the Arsenal and other related stuff as well to do with, of course, some fantastic prizes. And best of luck to those that get involved. Well, let's go to part 2 and your questions right after this. Okay, this is part 2 of the show where, of course, we tackle your questions and more. So if you've got any questions you'd like to throw into the chat box, now is the time to do it. Right, let's jump, shall we, to Ethan, who says, would you consider it detrimental to our title challenges if we let Smith Rowe, Vieira and Eddie go and not sign a single replacement? Surely Eddie has to stay if we can't get someone in. Well, of course, we have signed one replacement, or we're expecting the announcement of one of those replacements today. Smith Rowe's replacement is considered to be Mikel Merino, of course, a player that plays in an attacking midfield position on the left 8 position, whereas Smith Rowe would, of course, more naturally play in this current system. So that is one replacement. Is it bad if we let Vieira and Eddie leave and not bring in a player, though, even on top of Mikel Merino? Yes. Absolutely, yes, it is. And I have said and maintained over the course of this summer, if Arsenal don't sign a forward player, it is a disappointment. And it is a failure if Arsenal don't do that. Even if we can, sit here and ask the questions of who, and I always ask you guys the question, who comes in? Because I am stumped in a lot of, circles as to who would be the right signing. I think there are players out there that I've not thought of, the club hopefully will be aware of, that they potentially could sign. I remember we were talking about Ademola Lookman the other day. He was a name that I hadn't considered, but I like the idea of Ademola Lookman. I think he'd be a really good addition. The problem with that deal is that it seems to be very, very expensive to get done. So I'm not sure if that is something that will happen because of the associated price tag with Lookman being at his absolute peak of his current value. So, yes, it would be an absolute failure to not bring in a forward between now and the end of the window. Ghost Speller says it's an absolute disgrace that Eddie is still here. What is more annoying is that he is destroying the number 14. Ghost Speller, of course, always our most optimistic listener in the chat box. Is it a disgrace he's still here? I mean, Arsenal have agreed a £30 million deal with a club that have then sadly failed to agree terms with the player. So it's not on Arsenal for me. I know that there's, I think I saw Harry yesterday suggesting that Arsenal should have just accepted Marseille's bid and that we would have got the 23 million and been done with it. Not for me. Arsenal need to improve this sales reputation. It has been a big part of where we stand this summer in making sure that the reputation of Arsenal's sales department improves considerably so that later down the line, when again we need to do these deals, we are not being taken for a ride, that we are not compromising our own principles on sales. And from my perspective, £23 million was too low. My threshold was always 25. And people will say, well, there's only £2 million. Well, those £2 million and £5 million and £10 million add up. And we use Chelsea as the example because, as we've spoken about on a number of occasions, according to Transfermarkt, they have overspent on players by more than 300 million. Arsenal, on the other hand, have underspent by around 30 million euros, which is, in comparison, shows you why one club is where they are and the other club is where they are. So I'd rather not be one over the other. And from an Arsenal perspective, if it turns out Arsenal get less than that 30 and get closer to 25 come deadline day, we've still done better than to, of course, get that deal done to sell him for a cheaper deal. Also, that £23 million, we don't know the structure of it. And I think Arsenal, to my understanding, rejected it almost out of hand. So I imagine that the structure of that deal was not very good either. Ashish says, if we don't bring in a forward, I'm concerned that we'll finish second again. We scored more goals overall, but it's those matches where we dropped points that a striker could have made the difference. What I will say is, Ashish, is of course we've already got one example this season of Arsenal playing a game that they dropped points in and now having a 6-point overturn of that game. You know, we lost 3 points against Villa. We've now gained 3 points against them this season, and nothing has changed in the squad. We didn't play any new signings other than Jurriën Timber, of course, who wasn't in that game last year. Mikel Moreno's not through the door yet, and Calafiori only played the last 10 minutes or so of the game. So if you need evidence that Arsenal can improve despite not adding a forward, that game is exactly the example that provides you the evidence to actually know this team is good enough to do things that it couldn't do last season because it's done it without players, of course, being brought into the squad at this point. So, and I don't even think Timber had his best game, to be fair, either. So it wasn't like his presence in the team was decisive in Arsenal getting those points. 1942, Biko says, Tom, earlier I asked about Coman, and you weren't comfortable with the loan because he plays mainly on Martinelli's side. Given what we've seen the left would do with him and he's able to play right wing, I think actually I said that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with the deal because of his injury record. That's been the biggest issue. Coman can play on both flanks. So I don't know if that's entirely accurate that I would have said about mainly being the left. The only thing I would say about him playing on the right-hand side, he's not left-footed, of course, so he's not inverted, but he can play on both flanks. So I'm struggling to see where I would have said specifically I wouldn't sign him because he's only a left winger, because he's not. The issue that I have with the Coman thing is the injuries. That said, if it's an option between either signing Coman on loan or signing nobody, it's an easy choice. You sign Coman on loan. It's not even a question. So I would sign him on loan if it was him or nobody. Stephen says, a Mudryk loan move. I don't rate him and flipped at Chelsea, but Mikel wanted him and I trust Mikel was willing to give him a chance. I think that that's an absolute non-starter. Mudryk has been poor at the start of this season. And yes, despite the fact the club wanted him, we've now seen him in the Premier League and it's not great. It's not like with Havertz, who delivered a Champions League winning goal for Chelsea. We've not really seen anything to suggest that Mudryk would be the right player for Arsenal to sign. So not for me. MD says it's not a disgrace in any way. And what's the big deal on the 14 shirt anyway before Thierry Henry? Yeah, I really think people have been a bit too sensitive about the whole number 14 shirt thing. Abel says, hey, Tom, I don't think they are going to sign a high-profile striker, but let's keep a close eye on Kingsley Coman on loan. I still think this is a good possibility. Rahul says, Tom, in the next 5 days, do you expect Arsenal to sell Eddie, Ramsdale, Nelson on loan, Kivior on loan, and buy a second goalkeeper and wide forward? It's a lot, isn't it? That still needs to be potentially done. I don't think Nelson will go. I think I've said that in part one. I think Eddie will go. It may not be for a £30 million sale now, but I think he still will go. I think Ramsdale will go eventually, and it will be probably on loan. Maybe Southampton, or actually, no, they've really pursued Justin Bylow, haven't they? So it seems like that's not going to be one that could happen. Maybe Wolves on loan. Ramsdale's situation is very tough. Arsenal have stood very firm on the stance that they want to sell. That's the Arsenal position on it. They only want a sale of Ramsdale, but it may be that they are forced into agreeing to a loan move come the end of the window and then try to move quickly for Joan Garcia of Espanyol. He is seen, of course, as the goalkeeper that would be a replacement, but at the moment, despite agreeing personal terms with Arsenal, that deal is on hold until Ramsdale's situation is, of course, sorted out. Do I think we'll sell Kivior? There's been some rumours about Bologna. There's been some name calling about Italian sides. Kivior was, of course, in the squad, I think, yes, on Saturday. I will just quickly check that. He was with the squad. I don't know if he was in the squad. Let me just have a quick check. Yes, he was in the squad. He obviously didn't come on, but he was with the squad. So I still think he should stay. I haven't changed my mind on whether he should stay. I think he should. Whether he will stay, maybe there's a chance Kivior leaves. I didn't think Vieira would go actually on loan, but that one came out of nowhere. So that kind of shows that anything is really possible during this window. Damien says, do you think Ben White's practices smashing balls at annoying opponents? Yeah, I hope he does, because he was very accurate in it, to be fair. Dickens says, Tom, so your argument is we'll not lose any games that we won last season. United away, City away. Did I say that? I don't think I did. I don't think I've said that at all, Dickens. I said that Aston Villa of the weekend being won was evidence that Arsenal can, of course, win the games that they didn't win last season, despite not making those signings. At no point did I say we'll not lose any of those other games. At no point did I say that. Anthony says, Tom, 65 million for Osimhen. If that's not a market opportunity, why are Arsenal not all over this? This is Arsenal prepared to be disappointed in this window. Anthony, I think, of course, the wages are a massive factor in this. Also, Osimhen, as I've mentioned for a long, long time, I don't necessarily see as a huge upgrade at all on what we already have. Havertz has started the season very well, of course, already. Goal and assist in the first game. He's already matching, of course, those goal contribution rate that he managed to get in the games he played at centre forward last season. Osimhen, I'm not convinced by. I've never been convinced by him. I'm still not convinced by him. I know that other people are, and that's fine. People are entitled to their opinions on it. But just for me, I think it's just not a deal that Arsenal are looking at doing. He seemingly is asking for a lot of money to go to Saudi Arabia at this stage as well, having already, I think, agreed a deal there too. Also, Arsenal, the striker situation is not where Arsenal need to bring in a player, for me, is an absolute desperation. It's the wide areas. Even if Nketiah leaves, the wide area is far more important than the centre forward position. There shouldn't be as much of a desperation for Arsenal to sign a striker. There should be more desperation for Arsenal to sign a wide player, because if Saka's out for whatever reason, there's problems. Whereas if Havertz is out, there is Jesus, who hopefully will be back. There is Trossard, who can play there. And even to an extent, if you have Trossard playing in that position, that, of course, then limits your wide options too. So a wide player is far, far more important than bringing in a centre forward during this window. John says, I think if Nelson is staying, then the priority is now an out striker. Ironically, that just completely flipped what I just said there. I still don't. I don't see it that way at all. I just think we need to look at bringing in a wide. To be honest, it's more about a versatile forward. That's why I kind of like the Ademola Lookman situation, because Lookman can play as a centre forward. He can play as a second striker. He can play on the left. He has played on the right. So the Lookman profile was quite attractive to look to as well. Jermaine says Johan Bakayoko. I think they struggle with that because, of course, he wants to start games and he's specifically a right winger. He's not versatile, so that would be a problem. Rahul says Tom, Barca are trying to sign Chiesa and Juve is trying to sign Sancho. In that case, do you think that Rafinha as a domino effect could happen as well? I would take Rafinha at this point in the window. I think it would be a good depth addition. I don't think he wants to leave Barcelona, though. That's the issue that we've got, and I think it's the issue that Barcelona will have. I don't think Rafinha wants to go. But he has a good goal record, for goal and assist record. I prefer someone like Leroy Sané, but I just don't see that being viable. But Rafinha, I think I'd be open to at this stage of the window to bring in that depth to the squad. Dancing Bear says Havertz isn't a striker. He's a midfielder. I don't agree. I'll tell you why in a second. Why has he been playing as a striker? Because we haven't got enough cover. He scores as a midfielder like Odegaard does. We need a proper striker. Dancing Bear, I'll tell you the answer to this very comfortably. In the 13 games that Havertz played as a centre forward last season, he had 8 assists and 8 assists and 7 goals. This meant a goal contribution rate of better than 1 in 1, which is a better goal contribution rate than Erling Haaland had last season. And in terms of goal per minute and goals and assists per minute, it was also better than Erling Haaland when playing as a centre forward. So saying he isn't a centre forward does not stack up to the argument that comes forward when you look at the numbers that Havertz has delivered. And it's not even a case of, he doesn't score in big games, because he does. Or doesn't assist in big games, because he does. He scores at Spurs, scores twice against Chelsea. He gets the assist in the 1-0 win at Manchester United. He gets the assist in the 1-0 win over Manchester City. He gets a goal and assist away at Brighton. This guy scores and assists in big, difficult games, as well as obviously scoring and assisting on a regular basis when playing there. He's already got a goal and assist playing as a centre forward this season alone. So the evidence is certainly against the argument that he isn't a striker. He's far better at that role than he is in midfield. John says, Gyökeres, I'm surprised that there's no real strong links with Premier League sides. What do they know that we don't? Again, that argument coming forward again about if everybody wants this guy, why is no one therefore going to try and sign him? And maybe it's because they feel as though they want to see him for another season in Portugal before they take that jump to go and sign the player. Olu says, hey, Tom, for us to sign another forward player, I think Nelson has to go. Without Eddie, we have 6 players for 3 forward positions, and he wouldn't play if he stays. I agree. And I think that obviously, I don't think that necessarily it's linked. I think Arsenal will be going for a forward player, even if Eddie stayed. But I guess we'll see if that situation happens. Michael says, if the deal broke down because of Eddie, what do you think we need to do with him? Personally, I think you tell him he's training with the under-23s and doesn't have a future in the first team. I think that, as we've talked about already in part 1, the expectation is that Eddie will leave between now and the end of the window. So there is a feeling, of course, that will happen. We don't know when, and we don't know who for sure. Palace looked the most likely at this stage. AFC Till I Die says, hi, Tom, do you think we might activate a release clause if we are in the last day of the window without any incomings like a Nico Williams or a Gyökeres. Release clauses, of course, always bring up this fan debate of, well, just pay the money. They are far more difficult than people realise, mostly because, of course, they have to be paid as a full upfront fee. And, of course, the player has to be therefore then convinced very quickly to make that decision to jump. Nico Williams, of course, we've seen seemingly wants to stay at Athletic for another season. And not only that, but Gyökeres, of course, is an £84 million release clause to be paid up front, which is so difficult to do. So it may be that Arsenal look at a release clause option before the end of the window, but it's by no means an easy decision, even if you just pay up the money. Idan says, Tom, for me, Lookman is overhyped. He didn't play well for Everton. It's a massive red flag. Do you rate him? I mean, 17 goals and 10 assists last season was very good. And he's had 2 very good seasons where he's been on the up in Serie A. Sometimes players do develop later. Sometimes they have, a late peak in their careers. And he's only 25. He turned 26, of course, this season. Or is it 27 this season? I think it might be the latter. But even at that stage, what he did for Everton, a poor Everton team, I struggle with. I struggle to kind of rule out the idea of that deal just because he didn't do particularly well when he played for Everton or even for Fulham or even for Leicester. If he's doing good now, I'm going to judge him on what he's doing now more so than on what he did before. When you have situations like Ivan Toney, for instance, I'm judging them what they're doing now. And that's why I have such an aversion to certain players and more of a liking towards others. I can't get on board with the whole hindsight of looking back 3, 4, 5 years ago at players and what they did in the Premier League, because they're a completely different player with 3, 4, 5 years of extra development under their wing. Jonathan says, if a deal can't be struck for Nketiah, we have to loan him out. We can't have another Ramsdale situation next season, a high earner who has lost significant value. Well, I mean, it's ironic because, of course, people argued that Nketiah had less value this summer than he did last summer. And yet we've managed to get a £30 million agreement with the club, despite the fact, of course, that the personal terms have been a problem. So it's not always a guarantee that a player will lose value significantly, because the argument was that Nketiah had lost loads of value. And some people said he wasn't even good enough for League One, when clearly that's not the case. So, yeah, it's not as clear cut. But I get the point. The element of the point still exists. Let's scroll down. We're going to be able to do a couple more before we wrap up. Ben says, with Arsenal and Arteta in to win something this season, I see more minutes in general with at least a good cup run or two. Will definitely need depth, and we might want to slow down on the selling. Devesh says, Tom, are you not worried about Martinelli? Not worried, no. I'm just interested to see if indeed he has the season that I really hope that he does. He needs a big season. He needs to find some form. I'm not worried about him at this stage. No, I think it's far too early to be worried per se. Concerned maybe a little bit, but I'm not worried, no. Maximus says, Tom, I'm genuinely worried about a backup for Odegaard. I am too, to be fair. If he is out for a few matches, who apart from little Nwaneri plays in that role? We are short in attacking midfield and right wing backups with Jesus' injury. I'd be lying if I said I'm not concerned about the depth. If Odegaard gets injured, there is no Vieira now. That said, if you'd have said to me at points in the season, if Odegaard wasn't going to play, would I rather give minutes to Vieira or would I rather give minutes to Nwaneri? And my answer would have always been Nwaneri. I think he is the better player in terms of a development standpoint with a ceiling. He may still lack in terms of immediate impact or immediate quality, maybe slightly less, but maybe he's not. And we just need to see it. I'd rather we put those minutes into Nwaneri than into Vieira. So I am glad that Vieira is going on loan. I am a little concerned about the lack of depth in that area, but I do think that there is something to be said about Nwaneri and his development and how good he has shown to be. So I look forward to seeing it, and I look forward to seeing Nwaneri get opportunities now during this season. Senki says, Tom, why is it Brighton seem to find gems consistently in the transfer market and Arsenal's scouts can't? You know me, I'm never a big fan of ultimatums on players. Arsenal can't. I mean, you look at the players that we've signed despite people not particularly liking them. Havertz has turned out really well for us. Saliba and Martinelli are big parts of this team despite costing very little. Zinchenko only cost about £32 million. Odegaard, of course, at the time when we signed him, was a big risk, and look what he's turned into. Leandro Trossard, at the time in January when people were looking to try and sign wingers, only Arsenal were really in for him. Look what he's become for us. I think the idea that Arsenal can't sign gems isn't true. I also think the idea that Brighton only sign gems is also not true either. If you have a look at their record of signing players, I mean, Carlos Baleba has not really done anything. Igor's not really done anything. They're the players, of course, they signed in the season before. You go back a little bit further. Billy Gilmore's not really done too much. Buonanotte, of course, has now gone on loan to Leicester. There was a lot talked about Yassin Ayari. He's not really done anything either. Kasper Kozlowski, Abdullah Sima, Dennis Undav, ironically, went and done really well in the Bundesliga, but he's going to be leaving Brighton, or if not, has already left Brighton. I'm not sure. Jeremy Sarmiento's not really done anything. Going back a bit further, Andy Zakiri, Michael Carbonic, Adam Lallana didn't. I suppose that was a free deal, really. Hasn't done much, but this is what I mean. Like, yes, they find their gems, but they're able to play them. Like, we can't play the players that they're signing enough to see them develop. Like, Brighton can play those players. It's a very different club. If you're a player that's in, 19, 20, 21, and you're looking at potentially signing for either Arsenal or Brighton, who's going to be able to give you the most minutes at that age in the Premier League on a good wage? It's Brighton. Brighton are going to be able to give you those minutes, whereas Arsenal aren't going to be able to guarantee you that unless you are of a very, very good standard. So the whole Brighton-Arsenal argument, there's a lot of flaws to it and not always taken into account. Clive says Marino can also play in that Ødegaard role, as can Havertz, as can Waneri as well. I suppose Marino is being a little bit overlooked maybe in the whole Ødegaard-Vieira situation. He was obviously brought in as a replacement to Smith Rowe. So you'd argue if Smith Rowe is going to play in depth to Ødegaard, so of course can Marino. And he can play that. Jabu says Baleba is really good, Tom. I agree with you on your overall point there. I'm not saying Baleba isn't really good. I just don't think he's necessarily fulfilled the potential that there was seen in him. He was kind of seen as the Moises Caicedo replacement. It's not necessarily come yet. I'm not saying it won't, but yeah, there's definitely arguments there. Right, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to wrap things up there. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Do leave your comments on anything we've discussed today down in the bottom of the show's comment section. I'll be back with you in the usual surroundings with much better connection for you, of course, tomorrow morning, bright and early at 8 a.m. Hopefully, we get some good news. There might even be an announcement today. Let's wait and see. But yes, stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful, but don't go just yet. Well, what I will say, of course, that if you would like to go somewhere on deadline day and do some Arsenal charity work, of course, you can go and support the Gooners Pod's art fair, which is taking place at Drayton Park on Friday. So please do go and support it. I have retweeted all the details on my Twitter feed. I'm just going to get you the full details if I can find them. You think that Mike from the Goodness Pod would retweet it more? Here it is. So yes, you can go to the first annual, it's going to become an annual thing, Arsenal Art Fair. Going to be able to win potentially prizes, see lots of Arsenal artwork. It is on the 30th at 9 o'clock in Drayton Park. I mean, you'd think they would put the location more specifically on the poster, wouldn't you, Mike? Looking at you. But yes, date and time, Drayton Park. So the Drayton Park is where it is. They should probably put that on the poster. But yes, that's where you can find it. So 7 o'clock, Drayton Park on Friday, the 30th of August. Go and support a fantastic cause if you're in the London area. It's a very, very good thing that I recommend you should go and check out. Anyway, stay well, stay happy, stay respectful, and all that lovely stuff. And as always, up the Arsenal.